So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Workshop 2 for Beyond 2032. My name's Michelle Maloney. I'm part of the Regen Brisbane team, and I'm also the co-founder and convener of the Australian Earth Laws Alliance. We're both delighted and happy to see you all, a little sad that we couldn't have our in-person meeting, but I'm sure many of you know that so many folks across Brisbane are sick. COVID's spiking, but there's also some other fun-filled flus floating around. And we apologise because a few of us are a little bit sick as well. So we'll all do our very best today to have an awesome, fun, safe online day. What I might do first is just share screen and do an introduction and remind us all what we got up to in our last fabulous workshop and other activities as well. So as I say, welcome. And we want to just mention that Regen Brisbane is an entirely voluntary network being built by fabulous individuals and organisations around Brisbane and in the region. And we kicked off last year with a beautiful hosted event at QUT, and all of the discussions from last year's events are on the website. But we just want to welcome you to the beginnings of the second workshop. But first, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play on the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. I'd like to acknowledge all First Nations peoples across this beautiful continent and anyone on the call, and really pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I always like to state that I'm in deep awe of the remarkable governance system and civilizational culture that cared for country and cared for each other since time immemorial. And within the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and our sister organisations like Future Dreaming, which is a partnership organisation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, we really like to make sure we always reflect not only on acknowledging country, but reflect on the ongoing impacts of colonisation since 1788 and the extreme amount of work that those of us who are non-Indigenous need to do to support and work in solidarity with our Indigenous friends and colleagues. So I'd invite you all to have a think about where you live and the plants and the animals that you spend time with. And yeah, just take a moment in your busy week, possibly a slightly sick week like some of us, and have a think about the beauty around us and the lovely world outside our homes and connected to our neighbourhoods. If you do want to pop down which part of Brisbane you're living in at the moment or wherever you're from, please feel free to put it in the chat. When we have our national webinars, it's always lovely to see people acknowledging country and saying hello from where they are, that growing awareness people have of whose country they live on, the unceded lands of First Nations peoples. It's pretty fantastic. So what are we all about? Well, today is workshop 2 of Beyond 2032, Reimagining Brisbane as a Regenerative City. In a moment, I'll introduce our wonderful co-conspirator, Elise Parrots from QSEC, and she'll be talking about how some of these discussions are going to flow into the work of QSEC and some of their upcoming events later this year. But what I wanted to do was just introduce you to the concept of what we're trying to build and talk briefly about the workshop we held earlier this month, the first workshop on the 8th of July. I think to set the scene, it's probably handy to know that a few of us got together to sort of start creating. We feel like we're an emergent space in Regen Brisbane last year. And this year, due to COVID and other things, we've been a bit slower than we'd hoped, but we've been kicking off these workshops. And we've got a master plan for some pretty amazing activities next year. But the history of it is that during the worst of the COVID lockdowns, Regen Melbourne was born, and colleagues of ours started using this internationally renowned concept of donut economics to start looking at what a regenerative Melbourne might look like. They spent 2 years building community and bringing networks together, and they've released an initial report on some of the visioning and things that people have been doing. And now they're doing a whole bunch of other work on what do metrics look like for a regenerative city. So Regen Melbourne kicked off a bit of a movement, really, which was lovely. So Regen Sydney and Regen Brisbane kind of bubbled up at the same time. And the reason I mention it is, I guess I want to encourage you that any involvement we all have together in Regen Brisbane is connected to a really, really lovely growing movement around Australia. There's a Regen Adelaide, there's some bubbling up in regional areas, like up in far north Queensland. There's some folks talking about creating a Regen Perth. There's already a really cool initiative which is separate but connected, our Regenerative Songlines Australia, which is led by Indigenous elders such as Anne Polina, Mary Graham, Tyson Yonker-Porter, and really other amazing thinkers and doers. So the Regen Communities movement, as I kind of refer to it, is building on the history of people trying to do things in a sustainable way, the transition town movement, everybody trying to ensure that the human societies that we're building are healthy, happy, productive, and doing no harm, and hopefully contributing in a positive way back to Mother Earth. The regenerative movement itself is really interesting, and there's a lot of discussion about how it's different from the so-called sustainability efforts in the 1990s. If anyone wants to have discussions about that, we can do that in our breakout sessions. I've got the image there of the donut economic model, which we can talk about a bit more later. We might chat about the donut after our introduction to the other speakers, but we'll be referring to it a little bit today in examining what a thriving society could look like for Brisbane. So Regen Brisbane has a beautiful website. If you're not familiar with it, please do visit it. I might ask one of our colleagues to pop that in the chat box. We're using the Green Prince approach, which is an embedded way of creating transformation that's linked to the health of a bioregion, whilst building a really strong, healthy, happy human society and economy as well. And we're connected to donor economics and absolutely connected to and really referring to the knowledge systems of First Nations peoples that we work with. And that donut is the Green Prince donut, because instead of just being a safe space for humanity, we talk about a living space for the whole Earth community. And you can see there that it's got an ecological ceiling built on the planetary boundaries, just like the European donut. But we've also got caring for country and bioregional foundations, accepting that all human needs and activities are entirely built on the beauty and wonder and resources of the living world. So that model is in the background of all of Regen Brisbane's work, and the Green Prince steps, which we can talk more about another time, are going to be really rolled out next year in a really cool body of work and activities that we'll be inviting you all to be part of. So our first workshop was absolutely fabulous. I'm sure you'll agree if you were part of it. If you were part of it, if you were there, perhaps you could put your hand up in the chat, just so we, not the chat, sorry, on the little boxes. Maybe we can get a show of hands of who came to our first workshop. We talked about thanks for doing that, everyone. What does a thriving culture look like for Brisbane? And as I said last time, I'm so grateful to Elise to including culture as the first element to discuss. We had the wonderful Indigenous elder and adjunct associate Professor Mary Graham talking about the relationist ethos. And we had some really terrific breakout groups and discussions, and we're just collating the material from that first workshop. We had hoped to have it ready for today, but unfortunately, pretty much everyone in Regen Brisbane's been sick on and off for the past 3 weeks, so we're a little behind. But we've got all this beautiful material and some really excellent suggestions and ideas, so we're going to be collating that in a way that shows folks what people were talking about in the workshop. And I might let Elise talk in a moment about, she explains very beautifully how she and her organisation look at First Nations principles as a core foundation for all work. And certainly the work that Ayla does and Green Prince does is very much connected into and built on what Mary Graham and many other Indigenous people refer to as relationism, or the relationist ethos, stepping away from anything beyond understanding ourselves as in relationship with country and with land. And that is the template for all of our behaviour as individual human beings in a society, and our connectivity with each other must respect and support not just ourselves as people, but country as a living entity of plants and animals and whatever spirituality you feel connected to place. So it's a whole lot more and so much deeper and richer than starting with discussions about the economy. So that's our first workshop. Today's workshop's all about what does a diverse and thriving society look like? And we'll come back in a minute to some of the questions, the program. Let me see, I've got my buttons all over the place. So we'll stay on time, I hope, and we're going to invite our wonderful guest speakers at 12:30, and I'll let Elise introduce each of our speakers to just give a stimulating conversation or a provocation about what a thriving society looks like and what are some of the really important issues we need to think about as we weave together this future, this regenerative future for Brisbane. We'll then have a lunch break, and in our discussion groups, we'll actually start with the the social pillars inside donut economics as a trigger point to go, is this what we think is important, or do we think something else is important? And then in the second half of our discussions, we'll look at, well, what does a fair, vibrant, happy society look like for Brisbane based on these pillars? So that's about it from me. I've got a couple more slides that I might come back to, but I might hand over to Elise to give her perspectives on workshop 1 and what we're up to today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful intro, Michelle. And I just loved starting with the Green Prints version of the donut economics and the inclusion of the ecological elements as well, and living within our means for culture. We at QSEC, the Queensland Social Enterprise Council, we do like to also start to acknowledge by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm standing on today is Kondamuka, and as we've done in the chat room there, everyone's walking on sacred territory wherever you are. We don't just say that as a token. At QSEC, we actually like to understand and acknowledge the incredibly deep work that First Nations people from across the globe have done over millennia around trade and about what business and what trade actually looks like. And we learn from their wisdom and the past ways of ancestors that have gone before. And often we summarize it as paying respect, obviously, to people past, present and emerging. We also love to see that any interactions that we have at QSEC is done with reciprocity. So we work together to exchange an equal value. We also, every social enterprise is around looking at their resources and not looking at going beyond the resource capacity of what they can do through their business operations, but also in the planet. And we love the word regenerative. We love that feeling that we're actually giving back through our business practice. And also a word that's come up very recently is renewal. So Terry Waller up in Sunshine Coast has also talked to us about, it's not just about regeneration, it's about renewal and the things that spring up from the earth. And these are all principles that we have learned over time with Indigenous businesses as we've worked alongside, recognising that they've got an enormously vast amount of wisdom that we have learned from. And we're very, very grateful to them for sharing those things with us. So today, we're looking at our society, and this is a really goes to me around how we started was around culture and around the way we turn up, our values that we represent, how we actually interact and engage with one another. And this one here is about our society. So it's almost like the next step for me. So once we get our individual practice and how we're actually going to turn up and how we're going to use our skills, how we actually then relate to others who might be inside this space with us. And it's, for me, our society is really about building social cohesion. And when we do have a look at social cohesion, what does that mean? It's about the sense of belonging, a sense of place. It's about really having that understanding that we are not just isolated in place here. We actually have to work within our society. And the way we do that, how do we build that regeneratively? It's not just about what's in it for me. It's about how is the common good being represented. And I know that as we were building this workshop, we wanted to touch on areas like obviously placemaking and the way that we design things to be around social cohesion and how we actually build and grow that. We also wanted to have a look at how work and how a sense of self-esteem can play into that, and how we actually create meaningful work and meaningful productivity for people on the planet. We also wanted to talk about mental health and how spaces and places actually impact on the way that we interchange with others and the way we feel about ourselves. We wanted to have Ivan from the Commissioner from the Mental Health Commission here with us today. And unfortunately, again, everybody's sick. And there's been lots of competing priorities. So we weren't able to have him, but something that we've spoken about quite a lot with the Mental Health Commissioner is how social enterprises in particular, that's the group that we work with mostly, so businesses who are really engaged not just through, wanting to do a corporate social responsibility, but really wanting to change systems and really trying to change things up. How social enterprises lend themselves particularly into the mental health and health perspective. They really look at things really differently to a normal business as usual approach. We've got some really amazing speakers today who are also going to touch on elements of the social enterprise that they're working in, and also elements of the work that they do to build community. So Sam Garbett is here from Australian Spatial Analytics. She's going to go first today. She was last on the list there, but she's got to race off to do some appointments. So we're going to get her to go first. We've also got Karen Walsh, and I know that she was stepping out briefly because there was a fire alarm. So, on top of everything else, not only are we dealing with COVID and people being sick, we're also dealing with fire emergencies at workplaces. Oh my God, we've got everything going on. But Karen Walsh is leading the MICA projects, and she's going to be looking at and talking through what MICA projects do around homelessness and sense of place and sense of belonging. And then we've got Kat Simpson here, and she's from SEQ Designs, and she is a placemaker and planner, and she's going to be looking at things like how we might consider transportation and access to space and amenity, and how that builds our social cohesion. Now, the interesting thing about having social cohesion, like when you actually get that right and you get the co-design right, and you've got people interacting with space, they turn up with their culture well and truly in place. They start to interact with others. When you actually build that social cohesion model and sense of belonging, you get what's called social license to operate. And when it's done right, and you turn up and you do all of those things, the social license actually helps to build a better and more regenerative society. So this whole frame that we're looking at today, and specifically for me, we're talking about social enterprises, but how business can be not just business as usual, but go beyond business as usual, how we all turn up and how we all create spaces to be much more inclusive, to be able to generate that sense of self and sense of self-esteem. So we're going to jump into the speakers in just a minute. But where we came to as QSEC, we saw a lot of what was happening around the design for the Olympics in 2032. And it seemed to us that we were putting the focus on the Olympics. And it seemed to us that people were just looking at that point as if that was the thing that we had to get to. What we wanted to try and examine was, what if we looked beyond 2032? Is somebody got their microphone? Okay, cool. What we look at in this particular sessions is we wanted to look at what would it look like if we look beyond 2032. It's not just the last thing that we're going to get to. We want to try and project, well, how do we build a regenerative society beyond that? And when we talk at Social Enterprise World, we talk about the 4 pillars. So it's beautiful to have all these frameworks with circular economies and donut economics and the green prints. I love the green prints blueprint as well. But in social enterprises, we look at it through a quadruple bottom line. So if it's culture, it's got to be the right fit for everybody. Society, it's got to make sure that there's a sense of belonging and inclusion. And we've also got to look at our environmental footprint. And we also have to make sure that it's economically viable, so that we're not just taking resources and not having that regenerative approach. So we look at those 4 pillars. And so we thought we'd set up these 4 workshops in the lead up to what we're going into, which is the Social Enterprise World Forum, which will happen in September. If you haven't heard about the Social Enterprise World Forum, it's the 28th and 29th of September. A whole heap of people from across the globe, and mostly from Australia, are coming together to share ideas around those 4 pillars. And what we're going to be doing at the Social Enterprise World Forum is actually sharing the ideas that we've tested at the cultural workshop, society, next one's the environment, and the last one is economy. We're going to be sharing the themes and ideals, and then having a graphic designer actually design this into a picture, which is going to help us to build our vision for beyond 2032. And we'll present that at the Social Enterprise World Forum, which will be super exciting. And then stay with us, because Regen Brisbane is going to take us into a city profile and really help to build an action plan beyond that, and looking at the other principles for ecological design as well. So it's going to be a really interesting, wonderfully inclusive process that we're going to embark upon over the next year and a bit. So right now, what I'd love to be able to do is introduce our first speaker. Sam Garbett is one of the leads at the Australian Spatial Analytics Social Enterprise, which is based in Brisbane, but is now launching across the whole of the globe. It seems like, I know I'm probably talking it up a little bit too much, Sam, but it seems like they're growing like topsy. And Australian Spatial Analytics, I'm sure Sam will go into a little bit about what they're doing there, but really their model is about inclusion, and particularly neurodiverse employees, and how they build an inclusive workspace to be able to have amazing things happen through data and data analytics, and how they actually then expand out across Australia is just incredible. So Sam, tell us a little bit about ASA, and also a little bit about your perspective on that inclusion process at ASA.
100%. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to meet you. I'm in a very, I consider every day a fortunate position to work with the people I do. I'm the General Manager of Operations at ASA, Australian Spatial Analytics. I'll try and make it simple. We're a data solutions provider, but the key difference, and as a social enterprise, 80% of our workforce are neurodiverse, primarily autistic. And 80% of those are typically between the ages of 18 and 35. So youth comes with its own highs and lows as well, and own challenges. But, you know, we live and breathe inclusion every day. You know, I arrived on the scene when there were sort of 2 leaders and 17 analysts. I can't believe that I'm saying now we now have 83 staff across both Brisbane and Melbourne currently. It's very exciting. And look, honestly, it wouldn't be without the dedication and attitude to learn and the flexibility of our analysts, our autistic analysts, that goes beyond and busts a lot of myths for sure. We wouldn't be here without them, because they perform the work not only for some smaller farmers up north, for some large enterprise, telecommunication enterprise that stretch across Australia and New Zealand, but also for local, state and federal government. So we consider it meaningful work. It's work that any other organisations would do. The difference is who does that work, and also how we support them within this organisation. So Elise, I don't know if you want to ask me more questions, or I'll just sort of keep running with the theme.
So I guess the first question that I would have for you is, can you talk to us a little bit about how important it's been for your business model around having an inclusive practice for your workers, and what does that look like?
It's a good question. And one of the most common questions I get asked is, well, how do you hire these people who have faced barriers to entering the workplace? How do you assess their capability? Now, we're in a position where we're hiring junior data analysts, which is an entry-level role. And what we've been really steadfast about is, do they have the right attitude? Because you can train skills, that's what we're set up to do, but you can't teach the right attitude. So some of our inclusive hiring practices are, firstly, how we go out to the market and look for people. You know, it's not just one stream that always works. So we reach out to disability employment providers, and they're key. We reach out to our LinkedIn and social networks. We've gone to Facebook networks where a lot of people, you know, we're talking to parents and aunties and uncles who are connected with neurodiverse individuals who maybe aren't as, I guess, visible or out on SEQ and social media. So it's first widening that pool. And also in doing so, diversity covers a lot of different, a big spectrum, you could say. We struggle to attract women because women are underrepresented in STEM, science, technology, engineering and maths, and they're underdiagnosed when in autism. So it's asking for, we're looking for neurodiverse, interested in IT, and it's going back a second and a third time and going, what, do you have any female candidates? Look harder, reach out further, because we're interested in broadening our pool of candidates. We then, provide, there's a computer activity, how's their speed, how's their accuracy, are there strengths in that? Because there's no point putting a square peg in a round hole. And when we're looking through their CVs, all we're looking for is either an interest in IT, if they have experience, great, and that they're a real person, really. And then, one thing that we implemented is we realized along the way, and look, we've made mistakes, there's no doubt about it, but what we've learned is there are some neurodiverse individuals, particularly when they're nervous in recruitment, that they struggle to get the words out, but their writing, they are so eloquent and expressive. So we put forward a written questionnaire where they could say what interests them, what their challenges are, which really helped us go, okay, so tell us, what's this person about? And then finally, there is an interview, because you do need to meet the person. But we try and reduce barriers, and that's giving questions in advance. And if they want to bring questions in, that's okay. Definitely trying to keep it as informal as possible. And recently we've had such an interest, and we did it once and we'll continue to do it now, always including a neurodiverse individual, like an analyst themselves here, because just the other day we've got someone sweating bullets and saying, look, I tap my foot, people find it really annoying. I haven't done well in other workplaces because I get sidelined because of it. And hearing another data analyst who was on that side of the table only a year ago say, it's all good, man. We all do weird things in our office. We're okay with it. Put that person at ease. So it's being, showing them what they can be. You can't be what you can't see. So that's just in recruitment. And then within the workplace, I have to say it's showing the flexibility that I believe every workplace should show. And I know we're not there yet, but it's being comfortable and equipped. And that's something we look to equip our leaders with, to have conversations where if someone's not performing, what's going on. And that does peer into mental health and personal home life. And there's a threshold to reach where, we refer to appropriate people. But sometimes it's just going, not everything's okay at home, and us knowing that makes sense on why they're not performing as they usually do and how we can support them. And it's just them typically feeling that they're being heard, that they're not just a number, and also, I guess, just them knowing that there are other people here with their own challenges and diagnosis, and that also helps them feel comfortable. And we don't just want, it's not about just having leadership that are neurotypical and our juniors are neurodiverse. We have seen progression, desire, ambition, and we continually look to support our juniors or our neurodiverse individuals into those leadership positions, because as I said, you can't be what you can't see.
So taking it up a level, so that's a really great, a lot of detail around how you operate. So if we roll that up again, inclusion practice, what I can hear from you is all around not just tokenistic. You've actually embraced the whole neurodiversity issue as not just a side issue. You've actually gone into it with your eyes wide open. There's going to be some barriers, there's going to be some challenges, but you've become flexible and inclusive with your own practice. And if we were to take that up into a societal level and look at a business as usual, the way that we operate our cafes, the way that we operate other shops or other spaces and public spaces, how important has it been at that level to actually have that inclusive process? Have you had some really aha moments, I guess, where you've gone, well, this practice has actually really changed the lives of these people, or this is why we do this? It's not just about being nice. It's not a nice to have. It's not just a token thing on the side. Can you tell us a little bit of a glimpse or a story about how that's really changed somebody's life?
Yeah, One, I guess, that's fresh in my mind, we had a gentleman, we'll call him Adam. He came to us on his disability support pension. So you can assign a monetary value that the government had assigned, that this person's not in a position to work and needs to be supported. Interest in videography, Adam came with, but you could tell he was switched on. Started at 2 days a week, so allowed for that flexibility. We can, connected him with mentors. He's now working 5 days a week, has transitioned to full-time, chose to give up the disability support pension, which kind of had to happen as a part of going to full-time. And he just travelled down to Melbourne, our Melbourne office, by himself. And yesterday was giving a tour and a presentation to other people, 60 people, about the work he does and the difference that employment and meaningful work has had on his life. Now, the value with that is, well, I guess there's a monetary value of he's come off a disability support pension and now he's contributing, and the economic benefits on that. There's the social, it's the personal self-confidence, but even more key is that ripple effect that he will have not only to his peers, intergenerational. So you hear about cycles of disadvantage. Now, Adam has potentially broken out of that cycle, but he will continue to inspire others within his family. And that wider organisation. So yesterday there were 60 people, from philanthropists to enterprise, who knows, there were heaps of people there, and they're hearing his story, and he's breaking stereotypes and maybe myths they have in their mind about who's capable of what. And that could influence just one person to go, I'm going to give this person a shot, or I'm going to interview them, or I'm going to create a job and widen my lens and scope. And the ripple effect is incredible.
Oh, it's so good. Oh my God. That's why we love social enterprise.
100%.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sam. I hope you guys could get a sense of, it's not just about a token effort here. Inclusion practice and what we do is actually much more about that real genuine connection, really meaningful action in connecting with others, and then pushing through some of the assumptions that we've created around disability, around accessibility, inclusion, really pushing out what we think we know, and creating a runway, I guess, to help people further their choices and decisions to be better than they ever thought possibly they could be. Thanks so much, Sam. I'm going to jump over now to, I hope she's back. So Karen Walsh is the CEO of Micah Projects, which is a fabulous community service organisation working out of West End, and looking at ideas of homelessness and connection to sense of belonging and place. She also runs several social enterprises, and one of which is the Hope Street Cafe, which we love, by the way. But Karen, can you share with us some insights around a sense of belonging and what you see as some of the challenges potentially around just looking at 2032, the Olympics coming up? I know we've had conversations, and I've heard you speak before about how people can be quite easily displaced through these big projects that come along. What are some of the challenges that you've seen emerging in this space, and also what are some of the possible solutions?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, look, fundamentally, we see housing as a foundation for an inclusive community, that rather than displacing and making people homeless. Clearly, COVID has had a big impact on housing prices, but during COVID, that was the first time ever really that it was recognised in public policy that to have a home and be in a home was for the safety and well-being of individuals and the community. And governments invested in ensuring that people had access to motels during that time. Now, it wasn't a land of luxury, but it was, motels and apartments, and we tried to match to what people needed, because often you didn't know how long it was going to be for when there was that longer lockdown. But as well as, you know, saying that it's good for the community. And I suppose if we can do that in a time of crisis for health like COVID, why can't we do that generally? Because clearly having a place to live that is affordable is both good for us individually and our health and well-being, and it's good for the community. So we have a, you know, sort of project that we call Brisbane Zero that aims to end rough sleeping by 2025. But certainly by the Olympics, we would want to make sure that homelessness is rare, brief and non-reoccurring. We would hate to see arriving at 2032 where we have to place people in, you know, substandard hotels because all of the other hotels will be booked out, or people will be picked up because of outstanding warrants and held indefinitely during, like they were during other events like the Security Council that was here that time. And the Olympics in Sydney also showed there was a lot of that kind of activity going, so that the homeless were out of sight and out of mind. And homelessness isn't just rough sleeping, it's also overcrowding. And when we did do the response to COVID, there was that people had to be indoors, but also you were only allowed 2 visitors in your home. So many people, we ended up with 1,700 people in Brisbane in hotels, across 42 hotels. And people were shocked and saying, well, where have they all come from? And, you know, were they just getting free housing? Well, no, they weren't. About 300 or 400 were probably directly impacted by not getting their COVID payment quickly enough, whether that was being able to go on to New Start or the JobKeeper. As soon as they got that money, they reorganised themselves and got new tenancies. But the rest were people that were living over long periods of time and for a range of reasons in overcrowded accommodation with their families. A lot of families, you know, had family members back because of COVID, like adults with significant mental illness and some of the conflicts that arise with that, because people really need their own place. So, you know, the demand and the need is really is increasing. And now post-COVID, when people thought there were going to be drops in the property market, there's actually hikes in the market because nobody accommodated the capacity of Australians to save during COVID because of working from home. The, you know, change in demographics, people coming up to Queensland. So social housing is only about 3.4% of our total housing availability. You know, that's dropped from about 6% post-war times. Our population increase is, you know, it's predicted that it'll be about 5.7 million by 2027. So who knows what it'll be by 2032. We really need to address the overrepresentation of First Nations people to the appropriate housing that they need. So when we talk about housing, we don't just talk about social housing. We talk about the need to develop an inclusive and equitable housing system that plans for demand and growth, and one that has a range of housing options to meet the needs of individuals or families. So what that means from, you know, people who are homeless, just building social housing the way we do now is not going to solve the problem. We believe we need a supportive housing system that sits alongside social housing, and that supportive housing system embeds healthcare and services, because we know the correlation between high healthcare needs and homelessness is quite high. And we know that people need longer term healthcare and support services in order to sustain a tenancy and have a home. We also need, you know, affordable social housing that people can be placed in and have access to services, make sure they're linked in with the services around them, that the social housing is built in service-rich communities, not too far out where there's no services because people don't usually have transport.
And jobs too. I guess, you know, the linkages to where jobs are too.
Yes,
right?
well, only a portion of some of the people who are homeless will probably ever have a job. Now. There's been too much time gone and they're sicker, like they're much sicker. So what they need is links to the community for meaningful activity. But that doesn't mean that you've got to work that out, who can and who can't, what people want, what stage of their illnesses they're at. Sometimes a lot of people with palliative care needs as well with cancer. So you can't have a one size fits all. We need to have a crisis accommodation system that looks at, you know, that you're there for a rare, brief time and that you don't have to keep going back and get stuck in it. So, you know, it's people have been, when we first started this, you know, really a breaking down homelessness, people had been homeless for 15 years. We know that we've broken down the duration of time that people are homeless for, since we've been working in a housing first way. Because when we did first 50 lives, 50 homes in 2010, the average length of time was 11 years. Now it's about 4. So we did house the most vulnerable and the people whose chronicity was the longest. And many of those people are still in housing. Some, you know, go between housing and homelessness depending on what's happening in their life. And we really need more affordable housing that is a percentage of market rent. And we need more ways that people can get home ownership. So we know the whole housing system is under pressure, but if we only focus on home ownership or, you know, affordable housing or build to rents, that's a percentage of market rate, that won't end homelessness. We've got to actually design and look at new models of housing, making sure they're environmentally sustainable, accessible for disability. So we need to really work towards how we do that. What we've done in South Brisbane is we advocated for the first supportive housing building, which is called Brisbane Common Ground. And when we were planning that, we were thinking of there were 3 foundational elements that you need. And that is a safe unit in which to be in, that is affordable and secure. You need to feel safe within your own body, which is healthcare, whether that's physical, your mind or your spirit. So you need access to the services and the issues around how people do have their own sort of calmness and peace of mind, as well as their physical well-being. And you need connection to community. And in that we talk about and have actively created our social enterprises to be places of community connection, but also places that could look at that level of whether it's a job, whether it's training, or whether it's simply social connection and meaningful activity, so that people can find their own journey for that. We're not making prescribed judgments or saying that if you don't do this, you can't live here. So people can do art, and we have art shows. People can do a whole range of things. For the social enterprise people that have done the training through Skilling Queensland, it's just been amazing watching the change for people who can work like they are. They've had adversity. They may have issues around anxiety and depression that they've been grappling with for years. There's the common theme for women is domestic violence, and these things have disrupted their ability to find what is meaningful. They can't even think about meaningful activity or employment or training when there's so much trying to deal with the overwhelm of getting the healthcare they need, or access to services, because health inequality is growing as well.
Sure is.
So if we want to have a foundation of an inclusive society, we've got to address inequity and improve what our access and equity framework is for people to actually get healthcare, childcare, family support services, housing. So you need a lens that is looking at access and equity, and diversity, not just looking at, we're going to build X number of homes and this is where they're going to be. So for Brisbane Common Ground, we know that, you know, it's got it always will have challenges, but we really wanted that to be affordable housing, not a homeless service.
Yeah.
And that it would be blend into the planning scheme of the area, which luckily government agreed to. And that, you know, we created a cafe and we've got an inclusive health clinic because, you know, there's numbers of people that are there. One of the priorities of housing in Brisbane Common Ground is people who are rough sleeping.
Yeah.
And it did take a lot of, you know, consultation, engagement. We've got solar panels thanks to the West End community's activism about, if you're going to go up to 13 stories, we want solar panels.
Yeah.
And, you know, all those things were really great. The community embraced the idea of more affordable housing. So we didn't have not in my backyard to deal with.
So that's part of that social cohesion and building the social capital and the social license to operate, really, because you're operating at a different level, aren't you?
But it wasn't without a lot of discussion and a lot of this is going to be supported. People aren't going to be left.
Yeah.
You know, it was unique in the sense that people slept rough on the site that ended up being purchased to build the building on.
Oh, wow.
And it was at Kurilpa, so it meant that we could engage a lot with the Indigenous people who had always lived around Kurilpa. And you know, about 25 people ended up getting housing there.
Karen, I think I would love to listen to you talk about this at length. So I'm going to book you in for a Changemaker Tuesday session for us, because I think that I could talk about this for ages. But I've also got Kat Simpson here from SEQ, and I wanted to take your point, Karen, of, you know, having the design element and looking at town planning, and particularly around how we actually build the systems and the places to support that inclusion practice from what Sam was talking about, but also the social cohesion that you were talking about, Karen. I love that you've got the planners on board with the common ground. That is so fantastic. Catherine, can you talk to us a little bit about the town planning aspect, and also what you do a little bit from SEQ design perspective, but also the placemaking element and how you actually embed that social cohesion in the planning element?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I hope I can. Thank you for that introduction, Elise. And yeah, that was a great presentation from Karen. By the way, Karen, I caught up with Carmel last night, and she's told me that I had to say hi, and I'm supposed to help you guys with the garden at some point. But anyway, enough said. So my name is Kat, and I'm the founder of SEQ Design. We are a placemaking, urban design and landscape architecture consultancy focused on circular city making, climate adaptation, and essentially creating great places fit for the future. Before I founded SEQ, I worked for a range of multidisciplinary companies worldwide. And I think it's probably good to touch on, I think Karen sort of touched on it, but that idea of lenses. So my training, I'm originally from New Zealand, and I trained in Copenhagen and also lived in Zimbabwe, Germany, and the UK. And I have to say, I've probably got quite a Danish bias when it comes to looking at the way we structure our cities and our regions and towns and so forth, because we're all socialist countries. We all have some kind of social infrastructure, but they sort of take it to the next level. They see it in a very systematic way, and see all of the linkages and are quite explicit about what the kind of outcomes they want for society. Whereas I feel like we do get into quite a few debates in Australia. We get into big debates in New Zealand as well. And it can be a bit of a block in terms of moving things forward. So in terms of the social infrastructure side, I'll try and see if I can turn this around and what I mean by that, by social architecture. So these are a few of the projects that I've worked on. This is a hospital in Algeria, where Algeria's got a functioning civil society. It did go through a civil war. It's got very little green space. This was a project in the UK looking at creating new parkland in Vauxhall. It's going through a massive transformation at the moment with new apartments and so forth. This was a project I did with a few other, I guess, urban activists in Brisbane to encourage Victoria Park and Brisbane City Council to bring urban agriculture into the park, and we were successful. And then it led to, we were finalists in the Rockefeller Foundation Prize. We didn't win, but we came close. So those are just a few examples of projects. And sorry, I can't show you lots and lots of slides today. My internet's not working properly. But where urban design sort of fits and where my passion is the social architecture side. And so if you want to think of social architecture or social infrastructure, it's things like schools and hospitals. And then paradoxically, there's a bunch of infrastructure as well that we can think of as social infrastructure. One of the probably most important ones, and I think this is why you guys got me to talk about it, is connectivity, streets and transport. So one thing that a lot of people don't know is that 40% of all public land in Australia in cities is our roads and streets, and they're not great. So they're pretty dusty. We are car dominant. I think only 15% of people cycle or walk to work in Brisbane. It's a very, very low number. And the result of that is if you do commute by car more than half an hour, you're 33% more likely to suffer from depression, 37% more likely to have financial worries, 46% less likely to get the recommended 7 hours of sleep, and 21% more likely to be obese. So there's all of these, if you look into the data, there's all of these things that come through when we look at a planning perspective at public transport. And what we also know is that it produces noise and pollution, carbon emissions. It's not great for climate change, our current transport system. So, we have a very low public transport. I think we're only 10%. And in 2018, they found that there'd been a 32% increase in Queensland pedestrian fatalities. So we're not going forward.
Oh, this is terrible. So, I mean, it's really interesting that you're talking about, when we're talking about our society, we're actually talking about the hard infrastructure that we live within too. And I think picking up on what Karen said, having that accessibility and looking at the way that we connect to places is just super important, isn't it? So what do you see some of the big challenges coming up for us in, beyond, when we're looking beyond that 2032? I'm just going to put it out there. If we only plan for the games in terms of connectivity and getting places, to places, or livability, accessibility to public space, amenity, all of that sort of stuff, we only plan to the games, that's for a peak load of 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, I think we have to bring people on. So I do this in Green the Street, which is all about greening our streets, bringing in complete streets. And we do activations each year at the Echo, which showcase what the street of the future could be. And it has led to new community groups, it's led to festivals, and it's led to a new street typology, which has got far slower traffic speeds in North Brisbane, and it's called the Green Street. My thing is that a lot of what we need to do is really clear. So we know that if we brought more more trains into the system, for instance, if we put another train link, and there is a lot of pressure to do this, and I hope it happens through the new Western Growth Area to Ipswich, we could see massive, what we call economic multipliers, but we would also see cultural, educational, and social multipliers. And it's unfortunate, but I think what we need to do, what I'm really focused on when it comes to these sorts of projects, especially the projects that are more pro bono and more about giving back and relating to people where we're going and what we should be doing. And the reason I do the Green Street is to showcase directly to the public and not to people that already know what's going on, so that the public can then put a bit more pressure on the politicians, because that's how change happens. What I find is that you have to speak the language of the person you're talking to. So when you're in a healthcare conference, you need to talk about health when it comes to the street. If you're at a conference or you're talking to someone from government and they've got an economics background, you have to talk about economic multipliers and so forth. When you're talking to engineers, because they take a risk and safety approach, unfortunately, talk to them about aspirations if you want, but you're not going to get far. but talk to them about risk and, you know, like downstream issues that will occur, and then you sort of like can bring them in. And it's the same with the Green the Street side. You know, you can put it in the newspapers, you can do lots of Instagram pages, but actually what I find works best is showing people like a built example, and then they can go, oh, this is actually lovely. And even if it's someone, you know, a bit more conservative coming to the Eka, it's hard to argue with like greening a street, which will also ultimately, you know, improve their property values. But then we add a few other things like, this is good for climate change, this is renewable tech, you know, this is how you recycle.
This builds social cohesion.
Yeah, exactly. And you're trying to make it, I guess, it's also about consensus building. Like we want to, I think we all have more in common than we think we do. Like having said that about, you know, how you win people over and thinking about the paradigm or the lens that they have, what's the common ground that we have, and how can we, you know, create that big common ground and then move forward. I mean, sorry, that was the actual word that Karen was using for another project, but it is that it's getting that base and then adding to it, and then going into further detail with others. Because I think that's one of the reasons it is building social license around ideas. And once people are familiar with those ideas, then you can really push forward. But it's a lot harder to present something when it's sort of at that radical stage and say, oh, this is great, as opposed to, you know, make it seem common sense. And then we can move forward. And like from the urban design perspective, a lot of people are talking about this. This is not my area of expertise, by the way, but I think there's a huge push now on the homelessness side, because we've seen what governments and local councils around the world have done to swiftly, if temporarily, solve it. And there's a lot of, you know, questions and wait up, that, you know, like, how did we do this? What should we, and you're seeing more and more governments and councils actually get to grips with it. I think as well, finally, like one thing I think we should do a lot more of, and this is a different lens, different paradigm, is so in law, you'll often look at the other Commonwealth or common law countries when you're looking at a new thing. So, you know, if there hasn't been a precedent set in your country, you'll look at what Canada's done, or, you know, New Zealand or the UK. I really think we could do that a lot more when we're looking at, you know, planning and urban design, because looking at the law,
looking at the policy setting.
Just that paradigm, just looking at what other countries are doing, and we have, because we all have the same problems. And I'm a big proponent now of the Healthy Streets approach, which is a UK-based approach to streets, but it's completely complementary as well to Australia. So not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but saying this has worked here, and every now and then you will get working. Yeah, sometimes you'll get a response, oh, well, this is Brisbane and that's not how it's done. But I think we need to get over that.
Well, thank you so much for that, Catherine. That was a really great insight there as well. And you know, the three speakers, thank you so much for your insights around inclusion, around homelessness, and how we create that sense of belonging. And Kat, I think, you know, we've got a long way to go in terms of actually building public infrastructure, amenity, transportation, connectivity, to actually demonstrate that inclusive practice and the social cohesion that we need to move forward. I just want to say thanks once again to the speakers. Are there any questions at all for any one of them around what they're doing, or any clarification points that we needed to make before we move on to the workshops with Michelle?
Well, and I did want to say we've got, in terms of our original program, we've got a good 15 or 20 minutes for Q&A, or we can move through quickly. So there have been a couple of comments in the chat, but it's a nice small group. So is anyone keen to go off mute and actually ask a question? I'm actually trying to find all our speakers to pin them again. Ah, there they are. Oh, they keep moving. Every time someone turns the video on, the list changes. Oh, gosh. Anyway.
So, Paul, I think you've got your hand up.
Yeah, please unmute and ask a question. That would be lovely to actually have a chat.
Thank you, the presenters. They were great updates, all of you. Thank you. One I'd be interested in from each of them is, and probably Karen would be most interesting because of the collaboration that they're doing, is how something that Australians don't do well is collaborate. And we're going to have to get really good at doing that. And noting that there's a lot of estrogen and women here today, I think we're going to need to get better at how we're going to do this. Micah Projects seems to be doing a lot of deep consultation, but housing is going to require many players to come together to solve this issue. Cooperatives, commercial enterprises, governments. So there's going to be lots. I know they're doing great work there, but if Regen Brisbane going forward was to pull more people together over this decade, how willing would people be to collaborate and cooperate like that? Be interested in that sort of approach. And maybe some of the others, Samantha or Catherine, how much does the sector collaborate amongst designers? I know it's quite a competitive field. You know, the Danish model's different, but your thoughts?
Well, look, I can only speak from my industry. It's very competitive in this environment. I probably find it more competitive than any other place I've worked in. And I think that's a bit unfortunate because, you know, we're all trying to go to the same place. We're all trying to get to the same thing. I think that there's a bit more, there's certainly more cohesion in Scandinavia in the planning and design industry because they have fewer silos. So if you're a landscape architect or a planner or an architect, you're just an architect. Like everyone, you have specialties, everyone recognizes the specialties, but there's a commonality there and a common approach. The social license and I guess the social contract is quite explicit as well. So, you know, there's an acceptance that higher tax is better for everyone. There's an acceptance that, for instance, they'll do things like the government subsidizes gyms because it seems like a cost, but it's not, because if you subsidize gyms, more people can go, fewer get unhealthy lifestyle diseases and become a massive, you know, billion-dollar, because lifestyle disease is going to be one of the biggest burdens on our economy going forward in the next 20, 30 and 40 years. So they just go, all right, this is easy. We'll subsidize all the gyms. And the other thing they do is they subsidize lunch, you know, so every day, if you work in an office in Copenhagen or if you go to university, your lunch has been subsidized. Most of the time it's free. So if you work, you get a healthy lunch. I remember I worked for a place that had 12 employees. We had 3 kinds of salad, 2 hot dishes. One was veggie, one was meat or fish or salmon, whatever. Then we had a range of bread. There was always olive oil, and then there was some kind of dessert. Like, again, there's a cost to subsidizing, but you're making everybody healthier. Like, why not?
So
and that's
question,
next level, obviously.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Gee, I wish I could work at a place like that. I want subsidized.
Oh, that's all of Denmark.
But that's
all of Denmark.
I think the question was around the collaboration, and Karen I think the question was around you know, what is the collaboration appetite, I guess, in the society? You know, what is that? How do we actually bring stuff together? Is it easy? Can we do it? Is it possible? Where are we going with collaboration?
I think collaboration's a word that's used in many contexts. I always remind people it came from the Second World War, and the definition in the dictionary was managing the enemy. So, I think that I'm
going to have to look that up. Managing the enemy.
So, you know, I think it's like, you know, keeping an eye on your competitors in some ways. And there's an element of truth in that I've observed. There's I think collaboration can be many things to many people, and people can sign up for it to get tenders and then just say, forget it, we're not going to do it when we get the tender. There's no accountability that people hold what they said in the tender to fruition. But I do believe, like, I love the collaboration that we had around Brisbane Common Ground because it was so diverse. There were architects, there were planners, it wasn't, I think collaboration works best when you're bringing people from different parts of the sort of society together to solve a problem, rather than just bringing people like yourself together to say, well, if we collaborate, we'll get the tender. We just loved that process of, we had Grocon, who was a construction company that was doing it at cost because of the economic, it enabled them to keep staff on, but just their insights in planning, particularly a higher density building than Queensland's ever had, like it's 13 levels, 146 units. We had the local planners that were really keen, local housing developers that were, obviously intrigued for other reasons, but they gave such good advice as well. And then at the end of all that collaboration, you've got to go through a competitive process anyway. So it is really hard because you usually don't get paid for the collaboration. Like people have to.
So this is where the subsidisation comes in, right, Kat?
Yeah. And I think if governments really want collaboration, then they need to think about how you actually remunerate the people for doing that. Because the other thing is, I don't think you want collaboration all commercialised, that every relationship is a fee. Like it's so you've got to work out those things. I mean, obviously for West End, we were very privileged in South Brisbane and West End to have community members and people from all of Brisbane who really felt passionately about wanting to do something about people who were living on the street. And they were very interested in the concepts of housing first, linking it with community, linking with healthcare. So sometimes you just have to have so many collaborators that it's hard to manage as well. But clearly none of us can address the social and economic problems that we face by ourselves. Like no one organisation or one person can do that. So you need an ecosystem that brings together the people that can create something that, has all the elements of people's expertise and vision and values, because then you'll get a better result at the end. And it's like we can all bring our own experience to the mix without having to be the expert on the outcome.
Well, can I just jump in, because I think Paul's question is really important. And from Regen Brisbane's point of view, in terms of the small core group we have at the moment, which we're about to deliberately aim to expand, collaboration, which is a very heavily loaded word if you look at its history, so I won't go there, but developing relationships is what Mary Graham and Indigenous people talk about. Everything is about relationships. And what's interesting is that when you move from personal relationships or even the time available to make meaningful relationships, you're left with a huge number of people, organisations and perhaps projects that you just don't have time for. So what we have to do in Regen Brisbane is work extremely cleverly and in a way building off, is it Catherine or Kat? Catherine?
It's Kat, but it's also
Catherine. It says
Catherine.
Catherine's iPhone, I'm sorry. But building off the idea of every audience is going to want to hear a slightly different thing to get them enticed in. And what Kira and I have been developing is a sort of a master plan to how do we get folks involved in land care and the catchment management groups? How do we get folks in Indigenous communities, housing, all of the different places interested enough to share their ideas in, to come and go as they please, but to be aware of, connect with and have even if it's a light relationship, because something like Regen Brisbane is much more complex than a single issue. It's much more complex than a short-term project. What we have to do is start building ways for people to exactly, I think, as Karen just said too, and it's very much the way we built the New Economy Network, which is now 5 years old, which is a platform so that everyone else can come and show their wares and do their thing and show their fabulousness, but then share with each other. So it's not about giving up time or sacrificing in this Western way of, but I'm so busy. Sure, cool. Don't do anything extra, but just take that little bit of time to share what you've been up to with others, and then other people will pick up, and building a true network. So I think it's going to be hugely challenging, especially because we have no budget and we're run by volunteers. But sometimes
But you've got good friends, right?
we have awesome humans already. We've got terrific friends across the entire network of regen communities in Australia. And I know that by developing this sort of rolling project across, particularly next year, inviting folks to come in and play with each other in a fun way that builds on their own interests. I think that's it. That I hate to say it, but the what's in it for me is actually really important. You know, why would they come? Well, we want to hear your expertise. We want to hear about your work. It's a chance for you to promote your work whilst also collaborating. But I just wanted to turn to Sarah has a question,
Sarah.
and then Kira has a question.
Yeah, so thank you to all the speakers. It's been really great to hear from you all. But I wanted to kind of ask a question, probably mostly to Kat, because of something you mentioned. So I feel like the conversation around inclusion kind of can't be discussed without talking about barriers as well. And sometimes I think while there are people that are looking at barriers towards people who are lower income, I think sometimes it does get forgotten a lot. There's a lot of focus, you know, on like disability and race, language, etc. But yeah, sometimes income gets forgotten. And Kat, you mentioned that like 48%, I think you said, of public land is like streets and roads. And I think I heard a statistic yesterday from someone that 80, this could be wrong, but something around like 80% of Howard Smith Wharf's precinct is apparently supposed to be like public land. And I have a huge problem with that for two reasons. One is I think that if that is indeed true, they're probably including really weird scrap areas that like aren't actually usable. They might be near a bollard and it's like, what are you even doing in that space? You can't use it. And secondly, those kind of precincts are not very accessible for certain people to freely be themselves. And I'm sure Karen can speak to the way that a lot of spaces are not inclusive for people who are homeless, yet alone low income, and, you know, like move on orders and stuff like that. So I wonder if there's anything in your work that talks about true inclusion for low-income people in public space. Yeah.
That's a really good one. Yeah, Sarah, I know exactly what you mean. It's one of those things that urban designers, landscape artists in Brisbane actually get really cross about, because so Howard Smith Wharf is like a lot of issues there. It's the kind of, I don't believe it's a true public space. Moreover, they've actually gotten in trouble. So if you know Space for Cycling, or if you know some of the planners, the community is regularly reporting on them now, because they've done a few things. Like they've taken parts of like the wharves, which was supposed to be public, and then they've put like new kiosks in. So I think it's a really good example of a developer just like being given free rein over a space, and BCC allowing them to do that. It's really unfortunate. And when you look at somewhere like South Bank, which has it's actually not a traditional ownership model, but the way it's run, if you talk to someone like Sean Walsh, who used to run all of the city parklands, the way it's run is that they know South Bank attracts people because of its public space. So they always invest lots of money in the parklands themselves. The periphery is where they get the rents or whatever from restaurants, but you can go to South Bank Parklands, doesn't matter who you are, have a great time, not spend any money. Whereas Howard Smith Wharves is like the complete inverse of that. You go to Howard Smith Wharves, there's sort of an expectation if you're there that you will spend money. So yeah, it's a massive problem, and it's something that a lot of people in the industry are like quite annoyed about, and actually council are continually getting complaints from a lot of us about it. That's one of the areas as well where there's a bit of a debate. I think though we should look at places like South Bank, which is doing it properly. There's still like a commercial part of it, but it's on the sides. And look, there's even more to talk about with Howard Smith Wharves, like even the procurement and that developer, like that guy, anyway, I always say, like, look, there's some stuff.
Yeah,
There's
it's
some
being
stuff there.
recorded, Kat, so just be
Yeah.
careful.
Let's not go there. Sorry, look. I don't think I've said anything that's like defamatory though. It's all public domain, and yeah, space recycling and those guys are definitely coming at it. I think it's actually a really good lesson as well. Like, you know, what not to do when you have a big public space. So parts of it are kind of wonderful, like the design. There's some really cool little designs in there, like some interesting interventions, but whole sections of it as well that were supposed to be public have been have converted from public to private. And also the other thing is, I used to cycle every day from Tenerife through there. I don't know if anybody realizes this, but like there used to be grass, big grass sections, and then they've slowly astroturfed, they've added power, they've added DJ booths, and these are all in the areas that are quote unquote public. So a lot of things have happened without even going through approval processes. It's not great. That's all I'll say though.
Thanks for sharing those insights. We've got just two more. Have we got time, Michelle, just to do two quick questions? Kira?
Hi, my question's for Karen, because I've recently found out about all the neighbourhood centres that are in Brisbane, and I just wanted to ask you how important those neighbourhood centres are to, you know, the community in, like, just in general. I know that the vulnerable people are using those services, but I was just wondering, how important are those neighbourhood centres in Brisbane, and also if they were fully funded, because I know that they just got a little bit more funding recently, but a lot of people work, you know, on a volunteer basis. If they were fully funded, you know, would they work better, you know, to support just the community in general?
Or could they build a social enterprise that would help them to offset some of the costs? Anyway.
Brain's going. Oh, you're on mute,
Karen, you're on mute.
Neighbourhood centres are a critical part, and there needs to be diversity in what they look like, because the neighbourhoods are different. You don't want to turn a neighbourhood centre into a service centre either, because your neighbourhood is diverse. So if you only have to go there for a service, then you can't go there just to connect with people. So you need neighbourhood centres to play that vital role of help with community connections. It also, you know, the history of somewhere like New Farm Neighbourhood Centre, it was as it got gentrified, it played a catalyst in connections around what New Farm should be, you know, and it's important that those linkages across socioeconomic or cultural, multicultural divide, you know, those things that could reflect division or barriers can actually be great strengths, great parts of diversity. But diversity can't have a life if it's not somehow facilitated. I mean, it can happen easily in some areas where you've got groups of people that make it happen. But once someone leaves, then it falls, you know. So neighbourhood centres, I think, can really complement the natural leadership in a community. And not all of it has to go through a neighbourhood centre, but they can be a source of information, a source of linking people to different things that are going on. That sense of connection of there is a community of people here, and what are you looking for? You can that is undervalued, I think. The risk for governments is that even if they fund them, they don't see their value in doing that kind of work. They wanted them to do service provision, which will create a whole nother space, you know. So some can combine them because their neighbourhood centres are big enough to. Some neighbourhood centres are smaller, so they need to make decisions about what they prioritise. They're very much a place where people go during natural disasters for a sense of information, community, charge your phone. So I think they play a vital role, but they're all very different, and that diversity needs to be valued because neighbourhoods are different.
Thanks,
Wonderful.
Karen. So we might just move to our final, the person who has their hand up, and there's no
Muriel?
other folks. Yes.
Muriel.
Muriel. Would you like to ask your question, Muriel? If you're still there.
She's frozen by the look of it.
Ah.
I think she's frozen.
Well, I might just quickly respond to one question that came through that I sort of answered.
Oh, she's got it.
Are you there, Muriel?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Fantastic. Sorry, I'm driving on hands-free. It was just a real quick one. I just think we need to blow open what commercial in confidence is when it gets written into contracts with private providers or developers, and just ask ourselves why we accept that status quo. And I think some of that commentary about public spaces and transparency came to that. And I think at the moment it's 10 years since London's 2012. And there's an awful lot of review of what has or hasn't happened for the area, and did it deliver or not. So I think there's some really great examples of lessons learned and why we need to blow open some of that commercial in confidence, and what is a developer really delivering and what are they delivering for the future. So really it's kind of an observation I'm just chucking in there. Thanks.
Contentious, but yes, agreed.
Oh, I think it's really, I think that's one of the things I meant by commercialising the arrangements, and commercial in confidence is a big barrier to really working out what is the true cost of something, you know, what is the value and how you can replicate it. You know, it's not just the private sector. I mean, one of the things that I really challenged recently was in our procurement policy, where it used to say the Queensland government is funding this to ensure we have diverse, inclusive communities, or, you know, that it had changed to funding this to ensure good value for money and that we're not a burden on the taxpayer. Well, you know, we can't look at social and community investment as a burden on the taxpayer to begin with.
No.
And, you know, so I think that how government sees what they're procuring and how these arrangements of commercial in confidence, because then it often extends to the outcomes and what you got for that money, you know, and that's something that I think that we are seeing increase.
Thanks, Karen. Catherine, I see you nodding. Did you want to add anything to that issue? It looks like you have some thoughts.
Oh gosh, you're done. Sorry.
It's good. We want opinion.
To Karen, like, I totally agree with Karen's point. That's so infuriating as well, because like I come from a medical like background. Dad's a doctor, and you know, mum's a teacher, so very social on that side. But it's horrific when you look at it as like these burdensome parts of society. Like without healthcare, you know, everything collapses. Like it stops people from like essentially dying. And I think it's the same with housing. It's a ridiculous notion that they would do. I just think it's ridiculous they do that kind of thing. I know we don't have someone from mental health talking today, but one of the biggest problems all the GPs are having at the moment is they can't get anyone in to see psychologists, particularly people who are low income and people that are suicidal right now. Like it's really terrifying. You know, just this idea that services are burdens is offensive. But so to Mira's point, I think this idea of commercial in confidence and blowing it open is a really good idea, because if you look at other countries and what might happen with Brisbane and what probably will, there's a thing in the UK where you have to have a set amount of affordable or social housing in any development. So it depends on what council it is, but it might be 10%, 20%, 30%, 50%, right? And what a lot of the developers get away with is they win the tender to develop housing, and then they say, oh, we can only do 20% though, because otherwise it's not going to work. It's just the economics are not working, commercial in confidence. Then they'll get pushed down to 15%. Then they'll get pushed down to like 10%. And in some developments, they get rid of all social and affordable housing. And because it's, quote, commercial in confidence, no one can investigate that or challenge any of those claims. So it's something just to be mindful of, because it's a really good and easy way for, you know, let's say not all developers are bad, but let's say some of the less good developers to get away with really not doing anything.
Thanks, Kat. Okay, so look, we're out of time in terms of this initial conversation, but please don't feel that it's the end. It's really just the beginning. In a moment, I'll let Elise thank everybody. But before we jump off, I really want to invite you all to have a lovely break. I'm getting messages. There's a lot of us who are sick. I'm sick. Kira's sick. There's a couple of folks in the audience. Please use the next half hour to have a little lie down. I know I will, because we would love for you to come back at 2, even if you can't stay for the whole time. And this for the speakers too. We would love to pop you into the breakout groups and at least get you popping a few ideas in our Google Doc so that we can reconnect with you later to elaborate on some of your thoughts and ideas. So our plan is to take a break now until 2 p.m. We've allowed from 2 to 3:30 to have discussions and chats, but if the energy of our group is a little bit slow, we absolutely agree that we need to be kind and supportive of each other's needs. So let's see how we feel, and I hope some of you, all of you, can come back at 2 o'clock. But I might let Elise thank our wonderful speakers for these beginnings of good conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I do hope you can come back in a little while. Thank you to Sam. She had to go off to an appointment, so she says hello. That was Samantha Garbett from Australian Spatial Analytics. Thank you so much, Kat Simpson from Cirque Designs. Really fantastic to have a chat about all things public space. Awesome. And thank you so much, Karen Walsh from Micah Projects, for your insights around the community development work that you're doing, but also homelessness and sense of belonging. So thank you so much to all of our speakers today. As Michelle said, we're going to come back in just a little while to really think through some of the themes that we can start to jot down. And if you can't join us straight after the 2 o'clock break, Michelle, can we just circulate the Google Docs potentially?
Absolutely.
So that people can jot in their comments and themes and things, because I know the energy's very low.
No, everyone's so sick today. So that's a great idea. So if you are going to tootle off, just putting the Google Doc in the chat right now. So that link, we'll keep that open for at least 2 weeks, let's say 2 weeks. But what I really want to remind you is that we need everyone's input to begin with, just to sort of start the conversation. We're going to pull together the different comments and ideas from the different workshops, but then we're going to put it out for further discussions, and we'll be building and adding to it at the end of this year and online, and next year, hopefully, with a lot of really nice in-person gatherings. So there's the link. If you can't join us, please feel free to jot some ideas in. Pick any group. What we've got is we've got the Green Prince donut there, just to remind us that we're just starting, just so we don't have to ramble in too many different directions. We've got the 12 social pillars. We really want you to challenge them, to add your own ideas. Yeah, thanks. Brain's really not working so good today. So that's what the Google Doc looks like. We've just explained what Donut Economics calls the social foundations, just to trigger you to think and talk. If you're part of our discussions, we'll talk about them in little groups when we come back at 2. I'll put us into breakouts. If you just want to add some thoughts, pick any of the groups and put your own ideas in. We've just put 4 groups there. So 2 questions. What are the important pillars or elements of the social fabric for Brisbane? You know, are the pillars in the donut useful? And then what do you think a fair, happy, wonderful society could look like by talking through those pillars and looking into the future? And we've just put little headings there: group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. We haven't done anything too fancy schmancy today. We were going to use a Miro board, but we thought Google might be easier to cope with. So thank you. And yeah, we might pause the recording. This Zoom link will stay open, and we really hope to see some or all of you back here at 2 or even 2:05, since we've broken a bit late. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. See you in a minute.
Yeah, see you all soon. Okay, thanks everyone for coming back after our break. As we've discussed today, we're talking about society, what we'd like a flourishing society in Brisbane to look like. And the tool that we're going to use to share some initial ideas today is this Google Doc, which you've all got a link for. And as I was just saying, many communities around the world are starting to connect with the donut economy model. And for those who aren't familiar with it, the original donut has got just an safe operating space for humanity. And what happened is when the wonderful Earth system scientists, including Will Steffen and Johan Rockström, designed a methodology for working out what the entire planet needs to be well, the Earth system, they looked at 9 boundaries: ozone, air pollution quality, biodiversity, land use and conversion, fresh water, the nitrogen and phosphorus loading that was going into the world, chemical pollution or novel entities, and ocean acidification. So they were these planetary boundaries, and they still are. There have been a profoundly important planetary-wide understanding of what the entire planet needs to be well. And what Kate Raworth did one day was draw inside planetary boundaries this idea of, well, what would it look like to have human beings being socially just and fair to each other within these limits? What we've done inside the Australian Earth Laws Alliance and the Green Prince Project was we actually took the donut and said, well, let's think about both the outer limits of our planet and the human needs inside the planet, but do this as a living space for the whole Earth community, but recognizing the bioregional foundations of life and the Indigenous First Nations peoples' governance, legal systems that exist in this country. So that's a very short introduction to this as a concept. And groups like Regen Melbourne and others, as we mentioned, have used the old-fashioned, the European-style donut, looking at humanity's safe space within these ecological limits. What we're interested in today is if we explore these 12 social foundations, you can see water, food, health, education, income and work, peace and justice, political voice, social equity, gender equality, housing, networks and energy, then back to water. And the only reason we're suggesting that we start with a bit of a chat about these is, are they a useful list of items, pillars that are holding up our society, always with a mind to the fact that whatever humanity gets up to, it's within these ecological limits or gentle boundaries. We know the world's interconnected, but thinking about ecological limits is kind of like a revolutionary concept in Western societies. We don't do it. And sorry, someone moved water, or was it not there?
It wasn't there, so I
Ah,
just put it in.
thank you, anonymous hyena. All right, so that's just by way of intro. In a minute, we'll break you into groups. And if you'd like to just pick which group you're in, someone's already putting some ideas in, they may have had to leave. So feel free, whoever's group 1, to pop your ideas for question 1. What do you think are the most important pillars for the social fabric of Brisbane? And you could say, look, the donut stuff's all right, but we'll add this, or we don't like it at all, and this is what we think is important. We'd love to hear that. And maybe try to spend a bit more time on question 2, which is, okay, once you've worked out what are these ideas, how do we organise our thinking about our society a little bit? What's important? What should health look like? What should food systems look like? What should democracy look like, or whatever? So I will now stop sharing unless there's any questions. Fabulous. So what I'll do now.
Paul wants to
Oh,
ask
sure.
a question.
One thing, when Catherine was talking before, she was talking about transport. It's
Yes, and it's not there, is it?
not there, and I
No.
actually think that as a network, it's a really critical one that we're all interdependent and reliant upon. Just think it might be an inclusion worth considering, because it's just
Absolutely, Paul. So when I put you in your breakout groups, please add that. Like, what do we think of the pillars? And you might say the donut ones are okay, except we don't like this one and we should add this. James and I had that very conversation last night. I said, there's no transport. Maybe they talk about it under energy. But I think we'll agree, in Australia, our cities are so car dependent that it's a critical issue for connectivity of society, but also environmental impacts and isolation impacts. So yeah, so please.
And that's also accessibility too.
Oh yeah.
So transport and accessibility.
Yep.
And infrastructure to add to that. We could keep going and going, couldn't we?
Well, and that's what this discussion's about. What you're doing, quite honestly, is laying the foundations for what we would like to continue conversations across the Brisbane community in the coming year or two. So everything you're thinking about is important. Write it down in your breakout groups, and then we'll come back together. We might aim for an hour for the breakout group and then come back. Is that okay? We might wrap up a little bit earlier today, just because I know a couple of us are suffering chesty things. So I'll break you into groups. If anything weird happens and you come back into the main group, I'll stay in here for a few minutes. And yeah, just have a chat together. And look, you don't have to reach consensus or perfect agreement. Just jot down your ideas. You might have two very different views and someone might go, well, I don't agree with any of you. I'm going to put my views in here. So just do that. So just pop in whatever you think is groovy. Thank you so much. I'm going to do breakouts now. Assign automatically. We'll just have the two groups. And yeah, we'll see you back together in about an hour. If you feel like you've run out of things to talk about, maybe just shoot a note to us and we can bring you back sooner. But I suspect you'll need that long at least. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you soon. Okay, thanks everyone for coming back from your discussions. Sounds like they went very well indeed. So group one, Paul, would you like to give some thoughts or summaries about what you guys discussed?
Yeah, so it was really interesting. First of all, we identified that one of the things inside the donut model that we did not have was transport as an index, which is really important for so many throughputs, inputs and outputs, and just getting people around the place. And then we pretty quickly got into, I disclosed that as a local councillor, I've sort of been watching the architecture of the organisation being the South East Queensland Council of Mayors, who are effectively the organisation that made the Olympics come to South East Queensland. And it is South East Queensland, not just Brisbane. That the potential for the change and disruption to citizens is great, but there's not actually a consultative mechanism for the South East Queensland Council of Mayors to consult with citizens. We also identified that in the state of Queensland, there's no upper house. So an organisation and an upper house holds governments to account. So part of what Regen Brisbane could do is this bottom up kind of hammocking of ethical best practice. Also, as a local councillor, I'm aware that every council in the state of Queensland is responsible to deliver their planning schemes, and that's got to accord with the Queensland State Planning Act. And the purpose of the Queensland State Planning Act is to facilitate the attainment of ecological sustainability. When you look at the land use planning requirements, the descriptions, it talks about land use planning, it talks about air, future generations, it talks about biodiversity. It's a really interesting framing. And if Regen Brisbane was to use the donut economics to create some flexible frameworks for how people around their core areas of interest could identify communities of practice and then hold case studies of best practice and then hold them up as getting towards ecological sustainability. It accords with the planning scheme. It will also probably in a few years' time accord with what the IOC, the International Olympics Committee, wants to see here. And so could be a really interesting it could unleash a very strong positivity virus that unleashes potential for people to do all sorts of positive, proactive things. And we also thought it was important not to become another lobby group, but lobbying and leveraging using some Danella Meadows kind of processes is going to be important at various points, but to try and encourage a democratization of how we can use and manage and maintain the biodiverse requirements of an ecologically sustainable future. How can we do that best? And there's some interesting conversations. I think Fiona might have some points to raise and others. I'll just open it to them. But that was kind of an encapsulation of some of the points that we raised. And
thanks, Paul. That sounds like the big picture framework, which is very important and which we'll be discussing over the next few workshops as well, particularly how, and I put a comment in there somewhere further up that even within those lovely words around ESD, which is the old framework of sustainability that's still being used. If you go down a bit, I think I put a comment attached to this. So yeah, see, anyway, the thing that's missing and the thing that the donut framework sort of suggests, but Green Prince probably does more effectively for the local area, is actually nest everything we do inside ecological limits. Because the old idea of sustainability was balancing ecology, society, and economy, and that's been proven to be deeply flawed and completely ineffective. So let's come back to these big picture framings, and I agree with you. I think if we can connect a lot of what Regen Brisbane's interested in with existing frameworks and existing initiatives, that's terrific. But what Green Prince is trying to do, and we'll be showing that more visibly towards the middle and end of next year, is actually looking at everything in place and looking at everything within almost a macro bioregion space. So not just case study by case study, continual improvement. This is lovely. It's, are we there yet? What does an actual healthy bioregion or catchment look like? And what do we actually have to transform in terms of human activities in that space? Because the idea of sustainability as continual improvement or snippets and examples is terrific, but that's 30 years old. Right now, we've reached a point where we have to push humanity's impact on the planet back into some level of containment within planetary boundaries or healthy bioregions. So that's the deeper core of what we'll be up to. But I think all these conversations are totally excellent. Can we bring your group back to the specifics of the social fabric? So it sounds like you've got added into the donut. Sorry, can you go back up a bit? You've just got there. Oh, no, down a bit. You've added transportation and infrastructure and public space as some of the pillars. Is that right?
Yes. But in terms of the social fabric, what we decided was really important was how small groups can come together around their topics of interest and really explore. I mean, the conversations are going to get richer and deeper the more they actually are able to go across the region. And as people can focus around their aspects of the donut, that social inclusion around different people having different interpretations of how they want to, you know, when you look at work, who's doing work best? How can we encourage more of particular types of interpretations of the donut requirements? So it's around the social connection of interpretation and access to those different ways of doing things, the diversity.
Yeah, for sure. Was there anyone else in your group who wanted to talk about the actual vision for all the good things? We get that the process is going to be, like you say, guerrilla, bringing lots of terrific folks in to share their ideas. But in this moment with this group, did you say that the core pillars are reflected in that list from the donut, or did you see them as something else? I see there's another comment there under question 2. Did someone want to speak to that?
I can. So I just thought I'd add in a bit of perspective from a survey that we just did with the members of the Brisbane Junior Chamber of Commerce. So we asked them, like, what causes are most important to them personally, and what, you know, causes are most important to them professionally. And I did the analysis on that. So I just thought it was interesting to kind of bring in from a young professional's perspective in Brisbane, like what's important to us and what do we really want. So some of these touch on other elements as well, like environment and so on. But a couple of things is, of course, diversity and gender equality was a topic that came up quite a lot. You know, work-life balance, like what can we do to make sure that, you know, when people are working, that they can also, you know, have a life and raise a family and volunteer, and like how can we put that into the social fabric? Of course, you know, we're young professionals in this group, so it's, you know, career growth opportunities and fair salary. You know, particularly, you know, we're young professionals, so what can we do to make sure we have opportunities to go up and get a fair salary? Also on that, you know, the gender equality side of that, like affordable housing and affordable renting, that came up in nearly every response. Like, we're being told as young people, you know, eat less avocado toast so you can buy a house, but you know, generations before us, you could have one person on one salary, and you know, within 5 or 7 years or so, they could, you know, buy a house, but it's just not available for us at the moment. So that's one thing. You know, cost of living in a stable economy, that's particularly topical right now. Sustainability, of course, and climate change, that came up a lot as well. But also, you know, as young people, mental health awareness. I suppose we're kind of in this generation where it was talked more about earlier on, but you know, when we have managers who are a generation or two above us, who might not have grown up in that kind of era where mental health was more I suppose, talked about, like, what can we do to make sure that young people have good mental health support as well. So just a couple of bits there. It's not a conclusive list. It's just some points.
No, that's excellent. Thank you. Between Paul's really important overview and connecting it to perspectives around the political system in Queensland, and now this sharing of some really good insights into younger generations, I think that's really great. And I really can't stress enough that the idea of Regen Brisbane connecting with lots of different groups and bringing their voices in, even if we can't bring them into one big group, which is very much a typical issue. We have to go to folks where they are, including school kids, youth groups, lots of different people in lots of different places. So one thing I would ask before we thank you and turn to group 2 is, Naomi, if you're able to send any of that info through to our main email address at Regen Brisbane, it'd be lovely just to collect that and have that perhaps even on the website. So whatever you're happy to share, we want to make the Regen Brisbane a sort of a site of diverse views, as well as sharing some of the shared values. So
yes, well, you're happy to use that. I'm still in the weeds of a very complicated Excel spreadsheet, so I'm just going to go with this for now, and I'll leave it at that.
And just keep us posted. That's lovely. Yes, Paul.
Wonderful.
Just one other thing. There's a gentleman who wrote a paper for the World Bank who was in Queensland this week, is still here for a couple of days. I've just put a link in the doc. He's written an article called Building Capability by Delivering Results, putting problem-driven iterative adaptation principles into practice. Sounds very complex, but actually what he's doing is allowing feedback loops from people on the ground to develop into a body of work that over time changes things, acknowledging that in the first world, what we often do is come up with a problem and then identify a pathway through a policy to solutions that are based on an Excel spreadsheet outcome. This is much more complex, dynamic, and interactive stuff. There might be some value in that down the track. I'll just leave it there for those who might want to look at it at a later point. But
that's excellent. Paul, would you mind just writing in front of it in block capitals resource dash? Because what we'll be doing through all the chats and all the discussions, we'll be collecting people's suggested readings, references, great people, great books, great videos. Thank you.
Can I just ask a quick question just before we move on very, very quickly? We're doing the Green the City display in a week's time, so it's like next Friday. And we've always got like little signage pillars that explain like different concepts. So we've had a signage pillar on the circular economy, what a micro forest is, what urban agriculture is, and so forth. If anybody wanted to, in like very plain English that kids could read, it could be quite cool to have something on donor economics there. If anyone was interested. It's not my area of expertise, so like I could write something, but I always think it's better to ask an expert.
No, I think it would be good to write about donor economics and green prints as well, and maybe even Regen Brisbane. I wonder, Kat, if you could email me and just let me know how long, how short, how big, how tall, whatever.
Super short and super basic. Like, think, what could a 10-year-old like understand? But it's actually quite a good way, like, of getting it across to everyday like people anyway, because you know when you're at like an event like that, you're just overwhelmed. So having like plain simple English like helps immensely.
Yeah, and as someone who writes prolifically for lots of different audiences, if you could just shoot me an email and remind me how long, by when, for who, because if it's a general audience, that's really different to, is it 10-year-old kids or is it a general audience, and where will you put it, what will it be next to? It kind of helps to know the context rather than just give you a random paragraph. So yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And do send us any info about whatever that event is for your Green Street thingy. So many of us don't know anything about it. It'd be lovely to share that. Cool. Thank you. Well, that sounds like an amazing conversation. Thank you, Group 1. Anyone else from Group 1 got anything else they'd like to share? Otherwise, I might thank you. And if you'd like to stop sharing, we'll hand over to Group 2 and see what they'd like to share. And if they want to show us what they've been writing about, that would be awesome.
I can keep sharing because I'm just going to scroll down. So Sarah, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, that's cool. I'll go. So we kind of laid it out a little bit differently, as you can see on the screen here. And we had kind of some broader themes that I think could probably, like, some of them do go across question 1 and question 2, which is fine. It's all about how you kind of use it afterwards. So in terms of the what was missing from the donut economic model that you have developed, I mean, obviously it's pretty amazing as it stands, but
Well, sorry, can I just stress the donut model is actually being designed by someone called Kate Raworth. All we've done is given us, it's an I just want to really make sure no one thought that I was claiming it. And all we've done, that particular version is the Green Prince version, because we've included, some other elements, that's all. But do continue.
Yeah, you're right. Credit where credit's due. So I mean, it's pretty good as it stands, but if we had to kind of pick at it, I think it's I mean, some people mentioned just before we went into the breakout rooms that transport could be added, so I won't reiterate some of those things, but what we spoke a lot about was diversity and inclusion, and I'm not sure how detailed the model could get, but it was an interesting conversation anyway, because diversity is so broad. So we spoke about accessibility and participation, like how diversity can be included in terms of just communication information. You know, some of the examples that we talked about with, like, having, information when COVID came out that was in lots of different languages. So, like, the importance of communication and information for even disaster communications, IT having access to the internet, language and cultural barriers, access to space. I mean, that's something that we usually think about, but then there was, signage and, things on TV even, so that, like, there's captions and things like that. Diversity is quite broad, and I think it's really important. And we came up with heaps of things for that. We spoke about access to green space. I was actually kind of surprised that wasn't even on there, because it's something that humans and animals need, and spoke about it being more than just, like, access to lawn, like, but actually about access to forests, for people who live in cities to be able to get to them, and that kind of overlaps with the transport as well. And then it also overlaps with things such as disability. How do you get people who are in wheelchairs, into forests and things like that? We spoke about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not sure if we were thinking of having that for question 1 or 2, but that there's a lot of research that's already gone into those as important benchmarks, and having them as a guide on top of what is in the model or added to, I don't know, but like, not ignoring the existing frameworks that exist, I guess. And then we spoke about a rights-based approach to meeting basic needs. So once again, that's quite a holistic thing, whether it be education, healthcare, income, public healthcare, food, healthy food, but making sure that that's just a baseline benchmark, and that the aim is actually for flourishing, which goes beyond meeting those basic needs. But you could probably read some of the other ones there for yourself. I don't know if you wanted me to go into any more detail on some of those.
I think that's a great summary. Thank you. But still keen to hear what you guys got up to for Q2.
Yes, so as I mentioned, like, there was some kind of overlaps there. We did actually talk a lot in great detail about disasters and resilience with that, particularly as I think it's quite interesting that there's always a lot of community building that happens during a disaster scenario, and you also it's an excellent opportunity to evaluate the systems that you've got in place and where there's gaps, or and it kind of creates new systems as well. So we did talk in great detail about that in terms of food, supply chains, and there was a really, really great question asked by someone about whether there's an opportunity to democratize the existing knowledge of the SES, because they do already have a lot of information with, like, where to go to in terms of like quick access to community centres for various purposes. And we talked about eco villages a lot. And the insurance topic I thought was quite interesting as well, about that being a potential barrier towards collaboration and for access to actually doing things. The huge cost of having insurance in place. Oh gosh, there's a lot more than I thought there was. But in terms of moving forward, I also spoke to my group about the amazing presentation that Dr. Keir Smith did on scenario planning for the Green Prince Exchange series. And I definitely think that that would be a really great process or tool to use when discussing, a regen post 2030.
And one of the reasons we invited Keir Smith to do her future scenarios is scenario planning is a huge part of the Green Prince process. So next year we'll actually be using the Green Prince process to understand bioregions, catchments, ecological capacity, understand what we've been doing in our place, and actually embed all these human aspirations and ideas into the reality of that, and then jump off into scenario planning. So the answer is yes, not just yet, because the Green Prince approach is a lot more than just helping people think about what they want to do. It's what are we doing? What's the impact we've had in place? We're using Eleanor Ostrom's ideas of sharing the commons. First step is actually set boundaries, share common rules. And so what we're going to do is put our arms around Brisbane in a couple of different ways and say, well, actually, let's stop being abstract. What's actually going on? And I'm excited that you mentioned all of this stuff around risk and resilience. We've been in discussion with a number of excellent human beings involved in various disaster management groups in Australia, and a couple of them use the Big Map project, where they get people to literally stand on a 10 by 10 meter map that shows where they live and how to think about the biophysical reality of not just disaster planning and management, but land use planning, impacts of pollution, impacts of industries. What should we do? What shouldn't we be doing in a place to build our long-termism? And so that's exactly why the Green Prince Exchange is inviting experts in on a lot of different topics. And on the Green Prince website, we're about to arrange all that knowledge, like Mary Graham's talking about the relationist ethos is the first step of Green Prince. How do we think differently? How do we stop being typical Westerners and rethink concepts of time, decolonize our thinking, connect with Indigenous knowledge? How do we understand place, truly understand place? How do we connect with place? And then how do we build scenarios for a better future? Not in the usual abstract way, hooray, but what's actually going on in our place. And that's the deep core of what's happening inside Regen Brisbane. That's a little bit different to the slightly more Europeanized view, which is the donut economy, which is thinking in an abstract way about big picture ceilings and stuff like that. So I just want to feed all that back to you, because I'm really pleased you jumped into that scenario planning. It's like you've gone, yeah, let's do that. It's like, yes, that's what we want to do next year. But we have to have some core material for everyone to go, let's do this. It's like, well, actually, can we? Where do we live? What are our soils? Where is the water? Where are the rivers? Where are the butterflies? And if we are building a future for all of us, how do we do that? By knowing our history here and knowing what future scenarios look like. I can't wait to do the stuff we're doing with the Sunshine Coast, where we say, if we keep doing residential development the way it's going now, what will be left in 20 years' time? Nothing, except lots of badly designed houses. People aren't thinking long-termism enough, and they're not connecting human activities deeply enough into place. So that's my little rant, ladies and gentlemen. I get to do that rant because we've been building all these processes for many years, and now we get to roll them out. But thank you, Sarah. I did not mean to cut you off. Just mean to enthusiastically support your wonderful recommendation. And for anyone who's so inspired, I don't know if Kira, if you've got the energy, if you want to grab the link to Kira's, or even actually, why don't you show the Green Prince events page, because we've got Will Stephan talking about planetary boundaries. We've got one of the folks from the donor economics team. We've got me talking about Green Prince, Mary Graham talking about Indigenous relationist ethos. And it's really meant to be their core elements of learning and sharing. And we'll be building on that, including the scenario planning. So wonderful. Paul's got his hand up, but just before I ask him to speak, what I'd like to ask all of you now is, who else do you think we should actively invite to contribute into their thinking about the social. But first, Paul, you either had a comment or an addition.
Yeah, one of the things that came up, we did ask who is not part of this discussion, because there are lots of groups that are doing really interesting stuff. So that was definitely part of the social fabric. But I think we also discussed what is the direct relationship between Regen Brisbane and the 2032 Olympics. Is it intended to align, or is it just using that 10-year ramp framework, which is a really interesting time frame of 10 years for us to think very quickly about what's coming? And the other aspect to that is, do we want to design to that Olympics framework, or is it much more grassroots?
I can answer that for you, Paul. We had created the entire Regen launch event last year. It was all ready, and then we heard the announcement for the Olympics. So Regen Brisbane was dreamed up by a few of us long before we heard, or anyone knew actually, that it was officially coming. So our vision is something much more extensive, far-reaching than the Olympics. And I think what we think of it as the Olympics is kind of one of the milestones. And as we talked about earlier, and Kat was talking, how do you reach different audiences? The Olympics is just like it's like a wedge to go, oh, you're talking about the Olympics. Well, actually, how do we do this in a way that's fair and just and compassionate and sustainable? So I hope that answers your question. We want Regen Brisbane to be much more than just the Olympics, but it's a very good trigger point for a timeline. But we should not be limited by 10 years. Good grief. No, not at all.
I think the fact that the International Olympics Committee, who will want to be seen to be associated with best practice, the opportunity for them to tie into this stuff from a bottom-up perspective could be really worthwhile using as a shared North Star in a way.
Yeah, and Paul, a huge invitation to you and anyone to keep thinking about, how can we do this? How can we do that? How can we connect with more people? Because we're really just in the early stages of this, and you know what we want to do. It was wonderful that Elise connected with us saying we were going to run these workshops. How about we use them as a catalyst? And I said, oh, that'd be terrific, because we want to catalyze Regen Brisbane, but we need to bring lots and lots of folks in lots of different ways. So absolutely open invitation to all of you to put your ideas together around anything, any communities you want to reach out to, any events you want to run, and then please shoot them to us. And I think what Kira and I, we've got a little master plan, but we want to build a steering group, like a bigger core group than just the 3 or 4 of us at the moment. So any of you who've been with us all day today, or, you know, all sessions today and in the past, if you'd like to be part of that, let us know, and we'll keep building with you. Greenprints is literally like a bunch of stepping stones through the mire, but at any point in time, you need to connect with every human being you can think of across every kind of mode of knowledge system, and every walk of life. And it's both haphazard and delightfully ad hoc, but extremely built into a structure that's flexible. So Kira, would you mind maybe just capturing the name? Everyone, like Sarah saying she's keen, which is wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Just grab anyone's name from this discussion, and we'll continue to build and build and build.
Can I also ask, Regen Brisbane, Southeast Queensland is the Olympics. How do we tie in the Southeast Queensland element? Is it different, separate? Should we allow different chapters to set up? I know that's not an easy one to answer, but
no, look, to be ideological means to try to control. I think what we would like to do is keep rolling with Regen Brisbane. We've already got a Greenprints Gold Coast community, and we've already got a Greenprints Sunshine Coast community. We've got a number of other communities around Australia who are using a regen framing, but they're actually using it to access lots of cool groups, but they're using the Greenprints approach. So I say, let things emerge. We don't have the resources, the funding, the staff to control or to fund, or it's got to be organic. So if we roll along with Regen Brisbane, because we live here, we love this place, we care, and then we connect up with the Goldie and the Sunny Coast folks, and then it merges into something else. And it, you know, think of it as I kind of see it as we come together and then we pull apart, then we come back together and we pull apart. And even in September, myself and a few others, we're actually organising a Regenerative Communities online showcase, probably the 14th of September, if you want to pencil it in. And that'll be Melbourne, Adelaide, Sydney. Lismore's starting to bubble up. FNQ, Perth, you know, like just get people having a yarn. What are we doing? And who are the groups we want to find? And how do we respect and honor the phenomenal decades of sustainability and social justice work? How do we, all I see Regen, everything is the latest wave of human effort. I mean, you've been around as long as me. I was there from the beginning of the, you know, the essence of sustainable development, and now it's lost favor in the sexy Regen everything framing. But I say it's all good. It's all wonderful. Let's just keep pushing and making things good. So someone's just asked, sorry, the chat popped up. Regen Gold Coast. Actually, the wonderful folks at Edible Scapes, Zane Branco and Jorge, oh, I apologize. Oh,
one of our social enterprises.
Yes, he's they're a community garden, social enterprise food garden.
Yep.
Yes, I know them. I've met them.
They're official Green Prince partners, and they will be part of this rollout next year of a whole range of important gatherings and events and information stories. You know,
we've got a session coming up, Sue, haven't we? An industry forum
at Edible
Scapes. Yeah.
Well, if you want us to help, and see, this is what I love. I love the kind of, people talk about ecosystems, and it really is. Regen Brisbane is kind of a collection of flowers trying to grow, but many of us are like bees and butterflies cruising past going, woohoo, here's an idea. Yay, let's go over there. Let's come back. So if you guys want any input from us, or you'd like us to say, Jorge, go to that and talk about this, or just all the crossovers, they're confusing, but it's how life is. It's messy and lovely and organic. Well, mostly.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we'll make sure that you get an invite to the industry forum if you want to come down.
Well, and if there's anything onlineable, that would be good too. I have to say, I'm starting to hide in my little house because everyone's sick. But look, does anyone have any? I love Paul's questions and, you know, the way that we're trying to build all these different threads, but weaving and weaving and weaving this loose rug of loveliness. Does anyone else have any comments, questions, suggestions? Yeah, Supriya.
Sarah, you posted about Technium. What's that?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight that. I popped that in the chat. Michelle, when you mentioned the whole like big map thing about standing somewhere and go like, you know, contextualizing something, it did remind me of something that I saw a while ago, and I've had it saved in bookmarks on my thing to do myself. But I actually think, yeah, it's a quiz. Essentially, it's a quiz, and they ask you lots of things like, you know, where does your water come from? You know, things that people don't generally ask. They generally don't ask themselves, right? So, but I actually always thought it would be an interesting group activity, mainly just to make it easier because there might be some research involved, but I think it could be a fun workshop. Yeah,
definitely. And can I say that when we do our Green Prince steps, we also play biodiversity bingo. We get people to actually identify if they know which plants and animals live here. We have, you know, a selection of pictures and people have to tick things off or say, you know, which animals are now extinct, which animals used to live here, you know, and we throw in weird wild cards, and people often don't know what became extinct some time ago in place. So yeah, please, all those cool ideas, existing things. We've got a mapping tool, which is under development, and it's going to be amazing when we can democratize. This is exactly what Green Prince is about, democratizing information so people can have a much more informed way of making big picture long-term decisions. My standard line, I say it a lot, is, well, Lend-Lease and Woolworths know where they're going to be in 30 years, but communities are constantly responding to that next development. What we want to do through the Green Prince process is help people understand their place, what's happened in the past, what's projected for the future, detailed land use maps, detailed ideas about literally transforming old ag land to something else back to ag land, whatever. The very specifics, not just the concepts, the specifics of what a place could look like if we try to transition it to something much more regenerative. So huge challenge.
You mentioned the capacity.
Sorry, Paul, then Yoli. Yes? No, go Paul.
You mentioned the capacity constraint of, you know, there's not a lot of money and it's difficult and you're trying to be in lots of places. Are there people like, I'm going to mention a specific name and I don't know the ethics and if there's a match, but are there people in tech land like Mike Cannon-Brookes who could not let this be co-opted, but actually frame and enable the democratization via an open platform cooperative? Because down the track, the concern will be that a co-opting process will take place so that those with vested interest can turn this into what they want to solve their problem down the track. I don't think you're designing it that way.
Oh God, no. No, what we're doing at the moment is using free database systems. Just other people don't want to use them. They're all there. They're all free, and we're grouping them. But the bottom line is, yes, if we got funding, we could do remarkable things. If anyone has contacts, ideas, we can write funding applications, but we're often too busy doing things to look. Myself, James, Kira, and Christina inside Ayla are funded by 2 small philanthropic private individuals, one of whom heard about Green Prints in 10 minutes and gave us some funding for 1 position. Like, you know, compare that to the nail pulling out processes of government or other things. So funding is random. Much of the work that I've personally built for the last 15 years has been done for free on top of other work we get in to pay. So yes, we need funding, but it's not the only thing we need. We need really good connections and really tapping into everyone's area of special expertise or special love and passion. Like Supriya's already been amazing and is saying, I could help a little bit with your mapping tool. It's like, yes, come please. So, you know, the more we talk and the more we articulate what we want, what I find is amazing people have a little bit of time on top of what they do to share what they already know. And even if we can channel some of that, that'd be good. But yeah, obviously, if there's any funding anywhere, let us know or apply yourselves and bring us in and all of us do it together. So look, it's 5 to 4. I thought we'd wrap up early, even though we're a smaller group, but aren't we awesome? So many great ideas. So
Michelle,
yes,
Michelle,
sorry,
Yoli,
yes.
sorry, Yoli still had a question as well.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, please, Yoli.
Right.
Michelle, what I was thinking, what you're looking at is, you know, this big umbrella coordinating approach. And you're probably well and truly organised and you probably know about this, but I was just thinking about the collective impact methodology. And don't know if you know about it.
Yes, I think we've been discussing it with a guy who's been coming into our team, helping us with understanding systems change frameworks. But please continue. Love to hear more.
So collective impact has its own particular methodology. There's lots of really great resources out there that can give you a structure. It helps. There's resources around how you bring different groups together, how you meet with them, how to set up your structures. Just, and not to make it institutional, I'm not saying that, but just that might assist you in some areas that you might think, oh, we haven't thought of that.
Yeah.
So there's a whole fantastic range of resource around collective impact, which is essentially this.
Oh, and I'm really glad you mentioned it, Yoli. If you've got any references or materials, do share it with us. We're about to get into that topic. It is the same thing. I was just looking through my notes. It's the same thing that we've just started talking about. And this colleague said that we are sort of already doing it, but we can access more ways to improve. And that sounds fantastic to me.
There's opportunities just for helping people to go, wow, look at what we've done. Look at the progress. It's a self-motivating and inspirational journey, not necessarily.
No. And can I say, honestly, it's normally folks like yourselves who are already out there in funded work that are more likely to bring money into these things than someone like me who's buried into my eyeballs trying to build something and just make it happen regardless. So if you guys have cool ideas for funding support for anyone or anything, doesn't have to be me, let us know. We will help you write grant applications or impress people or give talks whenever people invite us to. But chasing funding has not been a kind of core component of what we're doing. And that's my own flaw.
And there's multiple revenue streams and grants, just one. And you've already recognised that there are others. So it's just recognising that there's multiple ways to do things. And it's a resource approach, not just a money approach.
Yeah. And if we can pay lots of cool young people to build this stuff so I can slither off to retirement in 10 years' time, then I would be thrilled beyond measure. So yeah, keep it all in mind, lovely ladies and gentlemen. Any other comments or sharings or thoughts before we start to wrap up? Elise, how are you feeling about our social discussion?
Oh, so rich. The conversations, the conversations we had in our little group were just really enlightening and so rich and so fabulous. I really hope that we can deepen this conversation, particularly about our society, because it's so multifaceted. And I think that, you know, what really stood out to me was our conversation about accessibility and participation, and how we actually balance, you know, the rights of people to get involved, and, you know, what barriers do we put in place, whether that's physical barriers, whether it's economic barriers, whether it's digital barriers, whether it's, you know, accessible housing, transportation. Like, there are some barriers that prevents us from having social cohesion. How do we build and design from an infrastructure perspective and also a policy perspective to make sure that the inclusivity and the accessibility that we want in our social spaces and our public spaces is right there at the heart of it? And I think there's so many different facets. This deeper conversation that we're building in this next year, I so get excited about it. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome.
Thanks, Elise. Are there any other comments or sharing? The one thing I would love to invite you to do is have a think about other folks you would like to invite into these discussions. Our next workshop will be around environmental issues for Brisbane. And then the one after that will be around the economy. But then hopefully by the time of maybe the next workshop or the final workshop, Kira and I will have a better space on the website for people to sign up and be like part of this whole thing. We're thinking of doing a directory like the one we created for Nina, where you can pop in your details and you pop up as a group with your logo, or just as an individual mentioning some of your areas of interest, so people can find each other. There's lots of different things you can do online, but most people don't have time to chit chat online, but finding each other, showcasing who's getting involved. And we welcome your ideas on any of it, because we're just making this up as we go within the realm of other experiences building networks. So but again, if anyone has capacity to volunteer a bit of time on a particular aspect of anything we want to do into the coming years, let us know. Everyone is welcome. If you've got, just be aware that when you make a suggestion to me, I always turn it back and go, wow, that's terrific. Are you able to help with that? So it's a bit of a catch, but we will definitely take on board your ideas.
Can I just say thank you so much to Elise, Kira and Michelle for setting this up. The amount of time, 4 hours is a long time for everyone. But to have the quality of this kind of conversation, when you add this up over the time of the number of years and people's contribution, that will be a significant metric in itself. But thank you for setting it up.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you all for sticking around for the 4 hours. You're amazing. Yeah, amazing.
Thank you.
So thanks, everyone. We'll be in touch. Elise and Kira, if you've got any final goodbyes or words or recommendations or adverts, let me know.
Just love you all. This is just amazing. You're fantastic. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yes, thank you. It was really good conversations. Very motivating and inspirational. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you, lovely human beings. We'll be in touch. We'll see you very soon.